Hi, I'm Cindy Abbott Letro, and this is Behind the Camera. And today we're going to be talking about, talking with and about a gentleman, Patrick Gallo, who grew up on Lancaster Avenue right here in the city of Buffalo. And if you went to see The Irishman, and if you're somebody that's been watching the story about Mario Puzo and The Offer, which is the behind the scenes of the Godfather saga, you've seen this gentleman. Patrick, just tell me a little bit. You grew up on Lancaster Avenue. It's really hasn't changed a whole lot. I mean, things have changed, but it's a very neighborhoody kind of place.
Yeah, and I'm so glad to know. I've lived away for so long, so it's nice to know that it still is. Because it was just a treasure of a childhood, very classic, cinematic. Since we're here talking about it, childhood. It really was. All your friends lived on the street. You ran from house to house. You had very little restriction. It was just hanging out.
Now your family, very Italian family.
Yes.
I was going to say because you're in The Irishman and The Offer. Obviously, Italian is something that is important.
Yeah, I think it definitely. I think I put out an Italian vibe.
Well, in fact,
as an actor, I think it's
one of the interviews I read said that you had oftentimes had mobsters and detectives at the dinner table. Is that true?
It's absolutely true. I mean, I think in the late 70s and early 80s, that was the kind of world it was, and absolutely true. And it was like no man's land. It was like the dinner table was no man's land. Nobody was gonna harass anybody. Nobody was gonna kind of make anyone feel uncomfortable. It was about eating and celebrating food and laughing and conversation. And so, it was later that I realized that, of course. I was only a child, but then, of course, it dawned on me. I thought, oh my God, all these different people.
Well, where did the bug for acting come? Because you went to Lafayette High School, then I think ECC, then you went to New York and actually studied seriously for a while.
Yes, I did. I actually, I would visit New York City often during that time, were the first times I would visit New York, with Mark Goldman, who we talked about, and Charlie is my best friend, and Mark has been in my life since I was 13 years old, and I actually failed out of ECC because we were supposed to go to New York, and it was on a day that I had exams, and I decided it's more important for me to go to New York than take my exams, and so I just didn't, and I pretended that I didn't know that I had to take them, and that was okay. And that's when New York became a part of my life, and then through a student at ECC, actually, who became a friend of mine, sort of made me aware of a school, conservatory in New York, and I auditioned, and 19 years old, my whole life changed. I went to New York, and I became, I guess, who I'd always wanted to be. You sort of reinvent yourself when you're in a city that no one
knows who you are, where you come from.
Yes, and so. That was a beautiful time.
Tell me about how this opportunity to play Mario Puzo came up, because I would think, we're celebrating the 50th sort of anniversary of The Godfather.
Right.
You weren't, I think, born when the...
No, I was almost.
Maybe a gleam in your parents' eye at that point. But how did that happen?
That came in as auditions normally come in. I didn't know what it was for. The character in the script, or the sides that I had, was Puzo, so I had thought, okay, is this about Mario Puzo? I don't know. The content was sort of driving toward the book, but I didn't have any idea what it was. It was a very secretive project at that time. And actually, I had Charlie, Mark Goldman's son. He was my reader on the audition.
Oh, wow.
And that was it. I read, and I had gotten word that, like 3 weeks later, I don't really have an attachment to an audition. I read, I work on it, I read it, and then you kind of let it go, and if it works, it works. If not, you move on to the next. And And many weeks had gone by. I didn't really think about it. Then I got an email saying, hey, they're interested in you. And it kind of moved from there. And then it was like, okay, I did another read. I met with Dexter Fletcher, who directed Rocket Man and Bohemian Rhapsody. He was in London. We had a Zoom. We talked about the character a little bit. I did another read for the studio. And the next thing I knew, I was on a plane.
I understand there's a lot of eating, that there was a lot of eating, that he enjoyed a good Italian meal.
Well, he did say to me, Dexter told me on the phone after I'd gotten the job, he called me, congratulate me, and and he said, you don't have to turn down, any peanut butter bars if you need to. Like, stay where you are and add a little bit if you can.
A little chubby.
Yes,
if you wanted
absolutely. But yes, there were many scenes. Obviously, there's a scene there where I'm eating ziti in a pool. That's become kind of a classic scene. And there's a scene where I'm eating a meatball sub. Another one where I'm eating pie. Another one where I'm just kind of wanting to eat more. I mean, there's a variety of scenes where I'm eating, and I was the kind of actor that, yes, I would eat it in the scene when I was doing my coverage, but if we turned it around, I would also eat, and everyone, would say, you don't need to keep eating, and I'd be like, no, that's fine, I want to eat for my...
This is part of my method, this is what I do.
Yeah.
I got to ask you, because the other sort of iconic role that you had was in The Irishman.
Yes,
and you were wedged between two of the superstars of the century.
I know.
Al Pacino, Robert De Niro. Tell me about...
Being directed by Martin Scorsese.
I know. How does it get better than that?
It doesn't. It really doesn't. And although it was a small scene in the film, the scale of the environment that I was in was extraordinary. It was an experience that is hard to articulate for an actor. It's kind of like, Scorsese and De Niro and Pacino are on, I can confidently say, every actor's bucket list across the globe. And I got it all at one time. And it was mind-blowing. We would do takes, and I've said this in interviews, and it's because it's true. And before we do a setup, if we were doing the scene and then we would do a setup and we'd have about a half hour, and I'd go and I'd call my mother on the phone, crying, weeping to her, because it was like, she did so many things for me when I couldn't pay my rent and getting me to New York City. She sacrificed so much for me. So I always it was always like, you got me here. I did a lot of work to get there, but she got me there, And she was the only call that I made that day 5 times, and weeping every time, and I'd come in and hair and makeup, but I have to wipe the tears away because it was a beautiful experience with them. And you're working with these great artists who you went down this path because of how inspired you were by what they did. And,
that's what I wanted to pick up on, because you're very excited about what you do, and you have had good success. And there are so many people out there that say, this guy is living the dream. That's what I want to do. I mean, what advice, what has sort of, been the magic for you?
The magic for me, it's a tough road. There's these, as my wife says, these dots of brilliance that kind of expose themselves to you, in your career. And then there's these long spans of frustration, because you love this thing you do. You want to do it as often as possible, and sometimes you don't get those opportunities. And so it's really about loving your craft and that being the only thing. Like, it was never, I want to be an actor because I want to be famous, and I want to, the art is so important, and you can't survive unless you care about that. And believe me, I go through phases where I'm just like, I can't do it anymore. I can't do it. It's so difficult. It's painful sometimes, And I've been so unbelievably fortunate. But it's believing in yourself, and it's sticking to your guns. It's a business where so many people will tell you to be a certain way. Mm-hmm. Your job as an artist becomes a lot harder when you say, no, I'm going to be me, and I'm going to stick to my guns. And it makes your job a lot harder. You work a lot less. But at the end of the day, when you go home, you go to bed, you look at your resume, and you say, I wanted these things, and I got them being me and being the kind of artist I am. So it's just believing deeply in yourself and trusting yourself to say, like, I love this thing and I'm going to do it.
Is there a grounding that you think you got growing up here that has helped you do just exactly what you've said?
I don't think I've ever been grounded in my life. And I think that's like a blessing. It's a blessing and a curse. My wife tries to ground me, but I'm just not that person. I'm always frantically above the ground. And like I said, that's a blessing and an absolute curse. I think I had a great life here. I think I had a really, beautiful childhood and rich. And there is a lot of things in there that are grounding, I think poetically grounding in my soul. But I think, Buffalo was this kind of, was also like a fuel for me to, not to leave because it was a bad place, but to leave to say, like, take this stuff here in Buffalo and take this life and soul that is growing out of the streets here and take it elsewhere and see what happens to it.
Well, it happened, and it's wonderful, and it has been a delight to talk to you, Patrick. And much success, and already you've had tremendous success. I can't wait to see what comes next.
Yeah.
Well, Patrick Gallo, thank you for being with us, and we hope that you'll join us next time on Behind the Camera.